Hi. Can I call you Steve or do you prefer Stephen?
Hi there, how you doing? Good stuff. I think that a couple of people are probably trying to join us here, right?
They're supposed to be.
How, I'm not sure how you want this next piece to go. Do you want just the three of us to chat, or were you going to join us? You get somebody else in the wings? Doesn't matter, whatever you like.
Um, so um, I am hoping that folks like Tracy and anyone else in the background is helping to get the other folks that are meant to be on right now into the call because they're not here yet, and I don't know, maybe they're having an issue with the link. Um, but until they're here, I would love to just continue to have you chatting. I don't have the most concise or articulate questions at the moment, but yeah, if you want to continue talking, this has been fantastic. And when your other panelists come in, then you all can just take it away for the next hour.
Uh, oh, I could talk till everybody's blue in the face. That's no problem. But I had spoken with Kurt from Inclusion Canada and Kerri from Arch, and they were going to join us on the Zoom call at this time. So are they in a waiting room somewhere?
Kurt just joined into the waiting room, so now I'm bringing him into. Oh, and actually, I'm going to stop doing back end because Fenrir has has logged in. It's just second nature at this point. But yeah, Kurt is in the room now. Hi, Kurt.
Hey, Kurt.
Hello, all. Good to see you.
Fenrir says hi as well. And I think the other person we were waiting for, are we waiting for one person or two more people?
Just Kerri, I think.
I really don't know who we're waiting, how many people we're waiting for, but let's just fill up the space while we're waiting and say, I kind of introduced myself at the beginning of all this, but let me just back up a little bit and say to people, because I don't know that anybody really knows who I am except for some guy with a big mouth. And and maybe that's enough. I don't know. But my name is Steve Estey, and I live in Halifax. I'm in Cape Breton today at our little place up here with my wife, trying to hide from the big city and all the nasty stuff there. And I've asked Kurt from Inclusion Canada and Kerri Joffe from Arch Legal Clinic in Toronto to join me for this hour to talk about the kind of legal pieces around international human rights law and C7. I talked in the last hour about how the reporting process can connect to this. But what I didn't talk at all about, because I wanted to wait until the smart lawyers got here, was I didn't talk about the fact that Canada a couple of years ago acceded to the optional protocol on the CRPD. And that has some very specific meanings for us. And it gives us some very specific tools as a disability rights community that we're going to begin to start to work with, probably after supper tonight. I don't know exactly when, but pretty damn soon, I think, because I think it's inevitable what's going to happen in the House of Commons today. So Kerri, Kurt, as we wait for Kerri, maybe you just take a moment and introduce yourself and your background a little bit, because I don't think people know all of that stuff, and I think it would be helpful for them to, okay?
Yeah, sure thing. Very nice to meet you. My name is Kurt Goddard. I'm the Director of Legal and Public Affairs at Inclusion Canada. I've been a volunteer or a staff in the disability movement on and off since 2011, to the last 10 years. I worked in politics for 2 or 3 different politicians at the provincial and federal level. And I saw the light and came back to the disability movement. I have a law degree in international law and in a Juris Doctor, and I am licensed in the province of Ontario. But my only client is Inclusion International, so I can't give any legal advice. But that's a little. There's my stats. Steve, anything else I should say, or that's?
I mean, that's fantastic. That's a great introduction.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, you know.
I just, there is one note. If anybody out there is watching, I understand that the vote tonight is going to be a free vote. So there is still time to call MPs and try to persuade them.
I've got a technical issue going on here. Our other guest, Kerri, is texting me saying that she's not being allowed into the chat room. So is there somebody that can fix that?
Well,
She said she tried both
Fenrir
Zoom
and Tracy.
links.
Fenrir and Tracy
She's
will get
texting
some
Kate.
eyes on that. Texting Kate. Oh, that's good. Kate, that's fantastic. Texting Kate is the right go.
Okay. So texting Kate worked. Okay, then let's let them sort that out. And so, Kurt, I just wanted to say to you that we're running captioning on this, and it's running through the Zoom link, and there's quite a delay on it. So it's just making interaction a little bit challenging, okay?
We will I'll put up a finger when I'm about to speak if I feel like there's a natural lull, and we'll also all be patient with any kind of delay from Stephen's end.
Yeah, that's great. Somebody is just sending chat message here, and I'm not sure. Okay. Yeah. Kurt, why don't you and Q chat for a second? Let me sort this out with Kerri, okay?
Sure. I was just saying that there's still time. It sounds like there's going to be a free vote tonight in the House of Commons on the Senate amendments, or at least a portion of that. I haven't looked at it closely, but there's still time for MPs to change their mind and vote against this thing. And there's still time for people to reach out and try to persuade their, the window's closing, but there's still a bit of time to make our voices heard.
That is fantastic to know, because I know a lot of folks will definitely want to jump on that and send any kind of, again, emails or call your MPs. From what I hear, like especially Liberal MPs, there might be some that are on the fence and whatnot. So give folks a call. I love to know that.
I really think so. I don't think a lot of the Liberal MPs have been receiving the full story and accurate information. I think a lot of Liberal MPs still believe that the government is required to react to the Truchon decision, and that's simply not true. So that would be a point to send by email that this is an unprecedented reaction to that decision.
Yeah.
Hi, Kerri.
Well, we have Kerri now. I'm gonna do a little bit more facilitation hat here, and then I would love if all three of you could just chat about potential ramifications of Bill C7 that you see moving forward. I know I have been talking a lot about, like within my own circles and friends, about like international precedents and whatnot that are going to be impacted by this kind of decision, and things that we've already seen in Like as has been mentioned in Australia, in New Zealand, I'm hearing from folks that this has raised a lot of discussion in the States and in like state by state basis. So if anyone has thoughts on that kind of thing, and we do want to continue talking about the CRPD and the impact of voting on this bill on this anniversary, like how emotional impact, educational or legal, everything like that, anything you want to speak to, basically.
I'm going to ask Kurt to talk a little bit about the discussion that he had with Jorge at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights the other day, because I understand that he had quite a lengthy conversation with a technical guy from the CRPD committee in Geneva. And while I don't want you to put people to sleep with a lot of technical legal mumbo jumbo, Kurt, I think that it would be helpful for you to describe in general some of the things that you guys talked about, because I think that, you know, we're not without recourse here. And while, as I tried to make clear earlier today, UN human rights treaty don't have the same weight as Canadian law, they do have a moral authority, and we live in a country that likes to pride itself on human rights, and we have a prime minister that likes to be seen as a progressive promoter of human rights. So I think that, you know, it sets a very interesting stage for us, and I think that our community should be aware of the kinds of things that can be done. So can you share a bit about that, Kurt?
Yeah, absolutely. So Canada has assigned and acceded to the optional protocol. So that's a side agreement to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And just as out of frustration and after the bill was amended in the Senate and returned to the House, we were just completely exploring options on a preliminary basis, and we're connected to Jorge Herrera. I think, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, and he is the secretary to the CRPD committee in Geneva. Very knowledgeable individual. We gave him a really skeleton overview of what's going on, or very brief overview of what has been going on, and then he laid out all of the best of his abilities with the limited information. We give him all of our options under the CRPD and the optional protocol. And so and Kerri can jump in and correct me at any point, but there are a number of different avenues available. One is an individual complaint, or it's called individual communication, where somebody's rights has been violated, or a group of persons' rights have been violated, and but they would have to exhaust all the domestic remedies in the country, which means you basically have to use every legal avenue available to you in Canada before you can actually make a complaint under the optional protocol as an individual. So we talked about that a little bit. The next was actually not under the optional protocol, but under Article 37.2 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. There, he seemed to, I still have more questions about this, but there are some options for our Canada's independent monitoring mechanism, or our National Human Rights Institution, we could take our complaints there, and they, as under that article, have the ability to communicate directly with the CRPD committee and have the the committee comment on the rights situation going on in any particular country. And then the third option was a systemic inquiry. This is when you have grave and systemic human rights violations under the convention. It's not just one individual, it's kind of, it's got to be a pattern of abuse, pattern of violations in the country, and with documented evidence that's beyond media reports. So you have to have a substantial body of evidence. And what this process, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, but it sounds like civil society petitions the committee, and then the committee, if they launch an inquiry, they designate certain number of members to.
Kurt, can I jump in here?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I want to jump in because you talk about systemic inquiry, and I think from my perspective, that's the most attractive option here. And I know that there are other examples, already existing examples of systemic inquiries in other countries. And I know Kerri is aware of some of them. So Kerri, I wondered if you could just give us an example of a systemic inquiry that has already taken place, so people have some kind of a sense of just exactly what that would look like.
Sure, I can. Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on the filibuster. Super excited to be here. Yeah, so there have been 3 inquiries that the UN CRPD committee has done until now. One of them was in Spain, and it looked at inclusive education and how students with disabilities were being treated in Spain, and whether they were getting equal access to education in that country. Because one of the articles in the CRPD talks about the right that students with disabilities have to get equal access to education. And so what happened in that inquiry was a group of civil society organizations in Spain, actually 2 separate groups, petitioned the UN committee, like Kurt said, sent a whole bunch of evidence about all of the ways that students with disabilities were really being excluded from general education. And then they convinced the committee that, there was enough evidence that it looked like there were grave and systematic, or possibly grave and systematic, violations of the CRPD. And so the committee went to Spain and actually met with government officials, met with civil society groups, spoke to students with disabilities and their parents and families, and also did a review of all of the laws and policies in Spain that related to education. And having done that real in-depth investigation, came back and wrote a report about all of the evidence that they found, and also their conclusions about whether there had been a violation of the right to equal education in Spain. And the committee found that there had been in that country, and then made a set of recommendations to the government of Spain about what steps it should take to improve the situation of students with disabilities and promote and respect the right to equal access to education. We know from our contacts in the disability community in Spain that I think they were quite the recommendations that the UN made to Spain in that inquiry. But I think they told us that there's still a lot of work that they're doing on the ground in Spain to try to get the governments to actually implement those recommendations. And I know, we've talked about this endlessly amongst ourselves, Kurt, Steve, and lots of other people, that one of the things, that's I guess a bit of a challenge with these inquiries is that, we might be able to get a great result, some really interesting evidence and some great recommendations, but it still often leaves us with a lot of work to do on the ground to actually get those recommendations implemented in our country. but I think that's in a nutshell what the inquiry is. It's an investigation by the UN committee into what's going on in a particular area of rights violations. And one of the powerful things about it is that the committee can uncover, while they're doing that investigation, can uncover all kinds of evidence and information that can be much more difficult for civil society groups to get at.
I've got a question. The thing that is interesting to me about the systemic inquiry is that, as I understand it, and this is my question, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, we don't need to wait for this to work its way through the court system. We don't need to wait for the Supreme Court to rule. We can go ahead and ask the UN, the CRPD committee, to launch the systemic inquiry now, or as soon as we, in short order. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's no criteria, like with the individual complaint that Kurt was talking about. There is that criteria to go through all of your legal avenues available to you in your country before you go to the UN. But with the systemic inquiry, that we don't have that criteria. So that's great, because it, as you point out, Steve, it can be a faster process for us, because we don't have to wait to go through all the court system in Canada. But having said that, it's still the inquiry still can take some time from start to finish.
Yeah, I mean, this has been the thing that has been frustrating for a lot of people. They talk about using the UN system, how long you have to wait for it to go through, for something to get for Bill C-7, once it's passed, the amendment's passed, and it goes back to the Senate. If it comes back to the House and it's passed in this session of Parliament, God forbid, but if that happens, then the next step would be for a case to be brought to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court were to find that C-7 was okay, then we could go to the UN through that process, through the optional protocol process, once all domestic means had been exhausted. But if we use a systemic inquiry, we don't need to wait, right?
That's right.
So that seems like good news to me. I'm getting old here. I don't have years, okay?
Yeah. Question for you. Have you talked about the anniversary? Have you talked about what it was like 11 years ago, and the bizarre fact that 11 years to the day we have to filibuster? Yeah. Have you already talked about that?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that. I was on the call for a while before you guys came, and we talked a bit about that. But I mean, it was with colleagues from Inclusion in Canada that I traveled to New York 11 years ago today to give the ratification papers to the Secretary General of the UN. And it's really bitterly ironic to be 11 years later sitting here talking about this. I mean, it just eviscerates the whole convention. Is there anything more fundamental than the right to life? I don't think so, And it's mind-boggling to me. So,
it is.
I'm finding every time I start talking about that in the context of the anniversary, I just get a bit more hostile. So I think maybe it's best not to go down that road, okay?
We don't want to incur the wrath of Steve Estey.
I will say about all of these international mechanisms that we don't need to just pick one. It sounds like you can activate more than one at a time, which is encouraging. So if the National Disability Rights community really wants to bring the force and weight, it might be an avenue to explore as multiple mechanisms. But
One thing that I really like about the inquiries, but I mean the UN system, you know, in general, is that it's not the UN committee, I think, likes to look as broadly as possible about all of the rights that are implicated by a particular issue, right? So even if you look at the statement that was put out by the joint special rapporteurs, it wasn't only about them expressing concerns about Article 10 and the right to life in the CRPD and you know, all of the challenges that C7 poses to that article, but it was also about the right to equality and non-discrimination. And it was also about the right or the obligation on states to raise awareness and really promote a positive views and positive ideas about disabilities, right? And how C7 really undercuts that obligation to promote dignity and promote equality for people with disabilities. And I just think it's a very powerful way of putting into perspective, you know, not, of course, the right to life is the key issue here, but there are other rights that are so fundamentally important. You know, the right to equality, dignity for people with disabilities. Like these are fundamental aspects of the whole project of, you know, emancipation and liberation for people with disabilities. And I just think it's so powerful to be able to bring a complaint that highlights all of those rights and how they, you know, work together and how each of them are violated, and together they're violated by this legislation.
Yeah, it's really kind of overwhelming when you start to deconstruct it like that, isn't it? It's funny, the last couple of days, I've been sharing what's going on with friends of mine that I've known from the CRPD drafting days. I was talking with a woman from Israel who is now a law prof at Columbia in New York City. And we were just chatting yesterday, and I was telling her about this C7 stuff, and she was just appalled by it. I put out a note to a few friends, and I got a note from Judy Heumann in Washington that said she was just really angered by it and things. And I think that, you know, we're going to find that as this goes forward, the international disability rights community, through the CRPD committee, but just through the informal network that we have of working together for a long time, people are going to be talking about this and so on. And I think, you know, Kerri, you're talking about the wide range of rights. You're quite right about that. And other mechanisms are important too. And I think that, you know, it really lays bare the kind of fundamentally ableist view of the world that we live in. And, you know, it's been a painful process, to be sure, but I think that it, for me, has been interesting and useful because it's really been something that's galvanized a lot of people, brought a lot of people with disabilities together in the same cause and so on. And I think that, you know, I don't want to be Pollyanna about it, but I think that it's useful for us to realize, first of all, that there is this fundamentally ableist worldview out there. But second of all, that if we come together and raise our voice, we do have some power and some influence. I think that that's a good thing. I hope that's a good thing anyway. I'm not sure how this process goes. We've got about another half hour together, and I don't know. I mean, there's nobody moderating it, so we can just talk as we want to. And I'm just wondering if I'm seeing stuff in the chat window here and stuff. Hi, Tracy, how are you? I mean, we can continue to talk, but I'm just wondering if there are folks that are online that may have questions or want to engage and stuff. I haven't been following your process, and I don't want to keep people from participating if they want to do that.
I appreciate that. You know, there was a comment in the chat a while back, and I'm going to scroll back and see if I can find it, Steve, because someone had said something to you on Twitter. Let's see. Gabrielle shared it. Oh, it just was, gosh, it was back from a fellow Cape Bretoner, Cindy McDougall on Twitter, saying hi and thank you for your activism.
I actually have a question. If we're on the topic, hi there, it's just Mark. I'm one of the tech support people right now. But so we're moving into this vote today with Bill C7. It's going to be debated and voted on. And even though I work in the field, I'm not too sure what's next. So I'm just wondering could we lay out, so let's say this passes or it fails, what's the process? Like what happens now? What's the next step with the bill?
So I can take a stab at this, but I mean, it depends what happens tonight or later today. But when the Senate amends a bill, it goes back to the House, which it isn't back in the House, and that the House needs to accept or reject those amendments. If it accepts them, then the bill will go back to the Senate for royal assent, I believe. If it rejects them, it will go back to the Senate for further discussion, debate, and basically both houses Chamber and House have to reconcile until they have an identical version of the bill, and that process is called the ping pong process. And once it's set, and then the bill receives royal assent, and it becomes law. But maybe that's a good segue into Steve's original question at the beginning of this hour is what effects that might have on the different provinces and beyond the country. I don't know, Kerri, do you have any more thoughts on that?
Sorry, the question is if C7 becomes law?
Yeah.
Well, oh, do we really have to talk about what's going to happen if it becomes law?
We don't have to. In fact, I think, like, even I will say moments ago, I won't say who, but I was in touch with an MP that nobody had reached out to, and I think they have possibly flipped their vote or have abstained. So at the 11th hour, MPs are still changing their mind. So, I mean, if you haven't reached out to your MP or you have a friend in a different riding, tell them to reach out to as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think, and just, you know, in terms of what will happen.
I wonder if it's possible to consider a scenario where it just goes back and forth between the House and the Senate until the order paper runs out and until the session is over, so that they avoid actually having to take a stand on this. I mean, it's not a victory on high moral ground, I take it. But if it goes back and forth between the House and the Senate, I mean, the House sits today and tomorrow. So if it doesn't get through the House today, then it can't, or tomorrow, it can't get through the Senate next week. And then, so it goes back the week of the 22nd of March. It would have to be back to the House, and then the Senate maybe the last week of March. But then we're getting into budget territory and stuff like that. So is it possible that it could simply be lost in the business of the House?
Yep, there are examples where that has happened. I think it's Bill S3. I can't remember the content of the bill, but that bounced back and forth, and it was based on a higher court decision, and it took years for it to be reconciled and to ultimately pass. In the United Kingdom, there's one extreme example where it bounced back 7 times, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it could die on the order paper. It could not receive royal assent right now. So the House doesn't sit next week, but the Senate does. So if it doesn't pass in the House, I mean, you're right. You have the budget. The budget's going to take up some time. The government could fall on a budget.
So we could adopt a kind of a ping pong strategy here. Not a very sophisticated way of putting it, I realize. Lawyers probably don't like that, but it appeals to me.
Nope, procedural lawyers, that's what they call it. They call it ping pong.
Yeah. I think Tracy had a good question about
I mean, having said all that, oh, Kerri, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay, Steve. No problem. I know there's a delay with the captioning. Yeah, Tracy had a good question about, and that maybe we could talk a little bit about in terms of if the bill passes, what happens next in terms of our advocacy and activism. I think that's a great question, and there've been tons of meetings going on between lots and lots of different people in different disability communities, strategizing, thinking about what the next steps might be. I know we're definitely putting a lot of thought into what the possible next steps might be at the international level. Kurt talked about what some of those options might be, but I think we really need to drill down now and kind of land on what we think are the most strategic options there and how to pursue those as quickly as possible at the international level. And certainly, I think lots of people are thinking about and, starting to get prepared for, possible cases, charter cases, human rights complaints, litigation, domestically, as sad as that is to think about. There's a lot of work already happening about that. So I think that's where we're headed. I mean, I hope that's not where we're headed, but I think we're prepared to head that way if we need to.
I'm typing, but I probably could ask verbally since there seems to be a quiet spot here. This may have been discussed already. I was kind of half in here and half out doing some back end stuff, but I am wondering if there is any room at the federal level for a like a charter challenge or a class action. And I did hear, Kurt, you mentioned that there's a need for a lot of evidence.
I will defer to Kerri on the charter challenge and the class action, but I do understand that even the Hansard I hear a lot of kids playing in the background, Steve, of your avatar.
Oh, I think it might be kids behind. There's a school right next door.
Oh.
I'll mute myself while I'm not talking here.
I'm sorry. The captioning, there's a real delay and stuff. And Tracy, I'll also say, if you're texting, typing in the chat window, it makes it really confusing for me because I can't tell where I'm supposed to be reading. So I mean, you can do that, but I I don't see what goes on in the chat windows. I've got it minimized, okay?
No, that's
But
good.
I wanted to share with you that I had a meeting with a parliamentarian yesterday, and I talked to Kurt about this. It was a Green MP from a Green Party MP. The person wasn't actually Green, but the Green Party MP from Fredericton in New Brunswick. And we talked about the court of public opinion. And we talked about the challenges that the disability community is having, getting our voice heard here. And we talked specifically about the Angus Reid poll that came out last week that said 65% of Canadians support this change. And I said to her, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but the Dying with Dignity crowd cooked the survey and they come up with a result that they want. So we go back to Angus Reid and they say, sure, we can help you and we'll discount it at $30,000. So we'll do a survey to counteract that tells the truth, and you'll only cut to $30,000. But we don't have $30,000, and that's a problem. So you're talking about next steps here. Something that has been very interesting about this mobilization process is that it's focused a lot of attention from a lot of different organizations. And what's been said before is a lot of different groups are doing a lot of different things. I really think that this is a strong indication that we need to work together. The only way this is gonna get us, we're gonna win, is if we can stop the situation where Inclusion Canada is spending a whole huge amount of energy on a strategy, and the Rick Hansen Institute is spending a bunch of money on another parallel strategy, and you know that everybody is in there doing stuff, but they're not coordinated. And I think that maybe Catherine and her group of people that are doing this disability filibuster may be paving a way for us to come together. And I think if we can come together from what's going on in the House of Commons today, then we'll find ourselves a lot more powerful than we have been with our isolated little efforts all over the place. We saw the same thing with Bill C-81, the accessibility legislation. You know, we had in the beginning, we had 7 different clusters of groups that were doing consultations, and everybody wrote their reports, and you know, Arts was involved with CHA, and CCD was involved with CACL, and nobody knew what was going on with anything. But when the rubber actually hit the road and Bill C-81 was tabled in the House of Commons, some people said, okay, you know, we've really got to come together on this. And it wasn't always a great big group hug and a love in the work that happened on Bill C-81 by any means. There was hostility, there was bitterness. There are people that still won't talk to me, okay? And that's life. But at the end of the day, and Kerri is one of them.
I'm only laughing because I'm in the same boat as Steve on this. There are people who still won't talk.
But we set aside our differences. We set aside our differences because we had a common cause. And my goodness, this is a much more urgent, much more fundamental cause. So we really, as a community, just need to set aside the BS that makes our organizations have difficulty with one another and say, look, you know, at the end of the day, we're all disabled people and we don't want them killing us. You know, that's the bottom line here. So, you know, if that's not enough to motivate you, I really, really don't know what is. So, I think that, Tracy, to your question of what next steps are really, we need to come together. And Catherine and her group of merry men and women on this disability filibuster, I think are leading that way. So I'd like to congratulate you guys on that. I hope you can continue to take the driver's seat because you're doing good work.
Just to add another sort of practical little point about another thing I think that, in terms of the activism that we can do, and to Steve's point about everybody pulling together on this, this could be an easy thing, I think, for everybody to pull together on and agree on. We have to demand that the government of Canada respond to the Joint Special Rapporteur's statement, right? So that statement of concern had 3 questions in it. I can pull up the questions. Kurt, do you remember the questions off the top of your head?
No, not off the top.
Let me see if I can find them. Oh, I have them here. I have them here.
Yeah.
Explain how Bill C7 does not subtly or indirectly reinforce ableist assumptions about people with disabilities, contrary to the CRPD. Number 2, please indicate how or whether the government has considered alternative approaches. And number 3, any measures taken to consult closely with people with disabilities and their representative organizations. So, and to my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, anybody, but to my knowledge, there's not been any response to that joint statement. Those are 3 really direct, specific questions, requests for information.
Can I say something on that, Kerri? I talked to people yesterday who are very closely attached to this process inside government. And there is a lot of work going on a response to this letter, but it's being coordinated by 3 ministries, okay? Global Affairs, Justice, and Minister Qualtrow's office are all working on it. So it's taking time. And I said to the person with whom I spoke, well, that's all well and good, but you guys are doing your dithering between ministries. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is leading the charge 2 doors down in the House of Commons to make this thing real. So get your shit together. Pardon me for saying it that way. But, I mean, it's not good enough to say, we're coordinating it amongst our officials. That just, it just doesn't wash.
So Steve, can we assume from what you just said that I think we can assume so the government is working on a response. So that's good news. But do you think we need to put some more pressure on them to get that response out as quickly as possible?
I mean, I know that there was an op-ed piece in the Toronto Star today by 4 law professors from across the country, Archie Kaiser in Halifax. The one that I know, but I did work from UBC and Ottawa U and one other. And they talked about the special rapporteur letter. I know also that I did an op-ed with Dulcie McCollum, who was my colleague during the ad hoc committee meetings. And we've sent that to a number of papers. We'd hope that it would be released today. On top of that, Dulcie and I wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister, which I know for a fact has been sent to his office. And they have it there. So, there is a fair amount of pressure happening, at least as much as we're able to put. We're also trying to meet with members of parliament about this. And I guess we'll go back to trying to meet with senators, Some senators are very supportive of this. And maybe as we go forward, we can bring some others around.
That's a good point. If things aren't completely accepted tonight, in the House. It will go back to the Senate, and the senators can speak, and they can speak to these amendments. So there's still time. They can delay, they can change and modify. So it's still worth the time to go back and re-lobby the Senate. Another thing just to flag, and I've just noticed, so Dying with Dignity has to report on its lobbying activities available through Lobby Canada. It appears that they've already begun lobbying the federal government on the 5-year review of the current regime. And so we haven't even been able to turn, because the disability community has been fighting this, but they're already out and lobbying on the 5-year review. So I just want to flag that to everybody, that we should also be talking to MPs about that, unfortunately.
And coming together as a community to figure out, right, strategically, what are we asking for in that 5-year review?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think I know there are some people that in the community that have started thinking about that and putting together some ideas about that, but
okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah, we should start to have that conversation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I know there's so many things that you could say, but also that you have 10 minutes left, so you're probably trying to think of what might be quick that you could continue to talk about. But yeah, and I'm sort of out of intelligent questions, but I've heard a lot about how you are all feeling. I'm curious how you're holding up, and I know that's not necessarily the point of your panel, but I've seen through this filibuster this week, how hard people have been working, as you mentioned, Stephen, the organizers, and they've put in so much time. And, this is just such a disproportionate burden on people who are already managing so much. Mm-hmm. And, I guess I'm asking if you have feelings about that, that you want to share.
I just for contrast, I was talking to a young staffer who's been working with us on the inside, and they'd been working on something for just a week or so, and talked about how draining and how tired they were from this issue. And then I thought about the rest of the disability rights community, and they've been just like working on this for years, and I just no, I don't have much to say, but just this contrast of seeing somebody who just started and how exhausted and drained they were from just a few days of this issue.
Yeah, I mean, Tracy, the first thing that comes to mind for me when in answer to your question is just sort of the context of all of this, right? Like, I mean, people have been working day and night, 10 days a week on C7 in the midst of all of the other issues with COVID that are going on, and all of the other really serious ways that our communities are experiencing the impacts of COVID. I mean, as a lawyer, I can tell you, like, the number of new COVID-related legal problems that have arisen, in the year that the pandemic has been going on is just unbelievable. And I think all of the issues kind of, it just feels like it's all, piling on top of each other, not to mention all of the usual stuff, right, that happens like in the disability rights world that we're busy with during non-COVID times, and all of that stuff is also going on in the background. So yeah, it is a lot. And I mean, it's just really a testament, I think, to everybody's passion and activism and dedication about, how much awareness has and how much, I think how much change as people have been able to make, you know, it's really like hats off to everybody.
Like they say, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. It's so strange, you know. I mean, I find for me, all of this stuff around Bill C-7, it's got nothing to do with any of my regular work. It's what I do in my spare time. And, you know, I used to read books. But I've been disability rights activist for a long time. I think probably 30 years I've been doing this stuff. But the discussion around Bill C-7 is by far the most intense thing that I've ever been involved with. You know, we talked about drafting the convention, and there were a lot of battles when we drafted the convention. You know, I did lots and lots. I could talk for hours about it. And in fact, I already have today. But there was nothing as challenging as this. I can say to you, and maybe it's good to, as we wrap up, I remember during the drafting of the convention, one of the big challenges was the discussion around Article 10, the right to life. Because there were states that simply didn't want the article in there at all. And they used the UN doublespeak arguments about, well, of course you have the right to life, so there's no need to put it down there, and this kind of thing. And there were serious disputes about that, because you've got, on the one hand, states like that, you know, I'm talking about countries like Belgium and places like that, where even in those days, euthanasia laws were very, very liberal. So you've got those people on the one hand. Then you've got religious states like Pakistan, you've got the Vatican, you've got Israel, you've got, you know, all of the countries in the same room with what I think you could say were fairly divergent views. And there were very heated arguments about this. And as somebody who sat through the drafting of the convention, one of the things that, when I look back at the document, one of the things that I find very interesting is that the shorter the article, the more contentious it was in its negotiation in many instances. And if you look at the substance of the CRPD, Article 10 is by far the shortest article in the whole damn document. And it's because it was so challenging to come up with language that we could reach consensus on. So it's very high level. It's what you would, it's how they describe it, but it's high level because it was hard to get Pakistan to agree with Norway and Norway to agree with the Vatican and things like that. So, I mean, they were interesting discussions and interesting days, but even those days were not as evocative and as emotional for me as the discussions that we're having around Bill C-7 here today, because those discussions 20 years ago were discussions that anticipated when countries would get to this point. And here we are. So I think it's almost 4 o'clock, and I just wanted to before I leave, I wanted to do my little UN fashion thing and say I have on a t-shirt that I bought in Geneva the last time I was there, that's the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm going to stand up so you can see. I'm not in the habit of doing fashion demonstrations online, so this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. But can you see it says, all human beings, somebody else read it, I can't, it's backwards.
All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights.
That's a strong finish, Steve.
There you go, friends. Free and equal. That's what it's all about, okay?
You know, when we drove across Canada a few years ago, and we stopped in Winnipeg because I had yet to go to the new Human Rights Museum. And that was such a striking thing to walk in and see the, you know, huge, huge statements of all of the rights, you know, just standing up. It was, you know, gave me chills. So, yeah.
That is a magnificent place, that Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg. Yeah, yeah, it's almost worth going to Winnipeg for.
I used to go
and I
on.
say that in jest in case there are Winnipeggers on the call here. I'm actually a big fan of Winnipeg, spent a lot of time there. But the Human Rights Museum is a marvelous place for sure.
Yeah, it
so,
was an experience.
Tracy, I'm not sure what we do here. We can stay, but if you've got other people lined up, then happy to step off.
You know, this is the fun part of doing a filibuster, is that we don't necessarily know moment to moment. Aislinn is presenting next, but she might not quite be here yet. I don't know. There you are. Hello.
Hi. Carmen will be joining me, and I heard he was just promoted to panelist, so
I see him in, you know, I see his little box. He might be trying to figure out how to, you know, get video on and all those things. So while we're waiting for that, I really want to thank you, Stephen and Kerri and Kurt. I mean, I just want to pull you off into a little breakout room and talk for another few hours, if that's okay. So I have so many questions for you, but you know, I think that this is so amazing of you to give us that context, and so fitting on today in a really depressing way. But you know, it's still great for people to be able to see that context and all of the, you know, legal issues around it that we could talk about. So I really appreciate your time. And
hi there.
Hi, Carmen. And if you all need to go, you can go. If you want to stay for a bit, you're also welcome to stay.
Thank you so much. Passing the torch. There's still time to call your MP. We'll fight.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks for all your amazing work helping to organize this.
Oh,
really cool.
I'm just the background. Yeah.